An armistice with Italy has been concluded. It is a great victory for the United Nations, but it was also a great victory for the Italian people. After years of war and suffering and degradation, the Italian people are at last coming to the day of liberation from their real enemies, the Nazis. But let us not delude ourselves that this armistice means the end of war in the Mediterranean. We must drive the Germans out of Italy as we have driven them out of Tunisia and Sicily. We must drive them out of France and all other captive countries. And we must strike them on their own soil from all directions. Our ultimate objectives in this war continue to be Berlin and Tokyo. I ask you to bear in mind that these objectives mean that we have still a long way to go before attaining them. The great news that you have heard today from General Eisenhower does not give you license to settle back in your rocking chairs and say, well, that's over. We've got 'em on the run. Now we can start the celebration. This war does not and must not stop for one single instant. Our fighting men know that. Now it is your turn. Every dollar that you invest in the Third War Loan is your personal message of defiance to our common enemies, to the ruthless savages of Germany and Japan. And it is your personal message of faith and good cheer to our allies and to all of the men at the front. God bless them.
You will feel that we are your worthy brothers in arms, and you will know that we shall never tire nor weaken, but march with you into any quarter of the world that may be necessary to establish the reign of justice and of law among men.
An attack on the German war machine with no frills. A day's work for a small unit of the great able to take you on a flight over occupied Europe. The streets and roads of France. Explode. Over Europe. In the years when we were at peace, Germany was all terrorized people from Guernica to Chungking. See poetic justice born in triumph on those black wings.
This way, that just as the Marines were ordered to leave Guadalcanal, an officer found a private feeling very sad, looking very depressed, and he said, "What's the matter with you?" And he said, "Oh, I just can't go home. I haven't shot a Jap." And so the officer said, "Well, listen, I'll tell you what to do. You go up to that ridge over there and jump up all of a sudden and say, 'The hell with your Hito,' and they'll jump up other people all around, and if you shoot first, you'll get a Jap." So he came by a little while later, and the Marine was looking very gloomy, and he said, "Did you do what I told you to do?" And yes, sir, yes. I ran up there, and I did just what you told me to do, and I said, "To hell with Hirohito," and they jumped up just as you told me they would, but they all shouted, "To hell with Roosevelt."
My mommy taught me that when anyone was nice to me to always say thank you. And he has been awful nice to me and all the other children like me. I'm only a little girl and maybe I should be seen and not heard. But for what you've given to the March of Dimes, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
И украинской. В многолюдной среде городов наших он был один. Взывает к мщению. Героями первые объятия. Не знающая ни прощения, ни пощады. В злобе расстреливали невинных людей. Проклятие убийцам! За ними гонится.
Synthetic rubber, one of wartime's newest industries, one of America's, but that doesn't mean that there will be tires for civilians right away. And here is why. The rubber products are tremendous. Rubber is one of our heaviest war material casualties in the Pacific, North Africa, Sicily, Italy. Here is where that rubber tire you planned to buy in 1944 may have gone. We are fighting a mobile war. We are rolling to victory on rubber. Remember, rubber has scores of other vital uses on the battlefronts throughout the world. Workers to make large quantities of civilian tires yet. So we must continue to protect our home front tires. Here is how you can help. Recap your tires before it is too late. Have it done as soon as the tread wears smooth. Share your car, spare your tires. Keep your car doing a war job and do your part in conserving America's vital rubber supply.
General MacArthur springs another surprise on the groggy Jap forces. Men of the 1st Cavalry get set to go ashore on Los Negros Island in the Admiralties. First, naval guns shell Jap batteries on the island, driving the enemy inland. As landing parties head for the channel, our planes bomb Jap position. This is part of the combined Pacific drive that has almost completely shut off 72,000 Japs from their home bases. The capture of Los Negros bypasses Rabaul and further neutralizes that important sea and air base. The island contains a vital airstrip and places MacArthur's forces many miles closer to the Philippines. Signal Corps pictures show the general inspecting the strategic prize. over 3,000 Japs killed and wounded. We lost 61 killed and 244 wounded. General MacArthur congratulates the troops. His message to them was, hold on to what you take. Generalissimo and Madame Chiang Kai-shek inspect the composite wing, a unit of young Chinese airmen trained in the United States and under the command of both American and Chinese officers. Already at work bombing Jap shipping along the China coast, these native pilots are destined to play an important role when we carry the war to the Japanese homeland. To the Madam, it's a dream come true, for she has been one of the wing's guiding lights. These young men, American trained and with American planes, will wreak sweet revenge on the invader. Gung-ho, they work together. With Berlin in ashes, a desperate Luftwaffe strikes back at London with telling effect. One bomb did this. Use your imagination for Berlin. The King and Queen visit bomb victims, and a chicken's a chicken these days. But a terrific anti-aircraft barrage and night fighters make the raiders pay. It'll take more than this to halt the winning Britain. Routine adoptions are news, but when 20 adoption papers attest the fact that a couple took that number under their wing, it's front-page stuff. Wilbur Arkea and his wife have legally adopted 20 Alaskan Indian children and taken their stride the problem of feeding them and keeping track of all these ration books. The foster father, part Iroquois, works as a missionary in Alaska, caring for as many as 50 children at a time. And now he works hard and long at his art of hand-tooling leather to keep this table supplied. Ranging from 2 years to 18, all these kids can agree on one thing for sure. That's our pop. RDX, most powerful explosive in existence, more deadly than TNT. It's so dangerous in the raw state that it must be stored underwater. The ballistic mortar reveals the comparative forces. RDX was known both to the Axis and the Allies, but it remained for the Allies to harness it, as shown at a Canadian military laboratory. A few ounces to be tested on a tree. Powerful medicine for the Axis. In response to the waste paper salvage drive, huge trucks loaded with bales of waste paper roll up to paper mills like McEwen Brothers in Whippany, New Jersey every day. So it's into the vat for the old paper and the reprocessing starts. This titanic paper-making machine is turning old waste paper into nice new cardboard to help package material to be shipped to our many fronts. Like magic, the great machine does its job, and you help in the waste paper campaign which makes this possible. Keep it up. Ruth Reeser, directress of the Veneta League, judges winning hairdos at the league's first annual hairstyle show in New York. This smoothie was designed for women in civilian volunteer war work. Easy to groom, yet smart. The winning hairdo, styled for women in the armed services. The object of the contest was to discover the best coiffures from the standpoint of beauty, simplicity, and ease of grooming. Safety for defense workers. the seventh column, a sleek hairdo that will fit snugly under helmets worn in war plants, preventing accidents. For the Red Cross lass, a worthy cause, remember? And with a seagoing tilt, we say, ahoy! For the first time in naval history, two sponsors, Mrs. Angelina Bertera and Miss Nora McCurley, jointly sponsor a warship. It's the USS Springfield, named for Mrs. Bertera's hometown in Massachusetts and Miss McCurley's hometown of the same name in Illinois. A cruiser of the Cleveland class, 10,000 tons, the Springfield will have the proud task of bringing honor to two cities. Nemesis of the U-boat, the blimp has played an important role in keeping our sea lanes open. And today, 10 of the training type go aloft for mass maneuvers. They are being manned by cadet pilots who have completed their training here at Moffett Field, California. These smallest blimps are used only in training and plenty difficult to fly in formation because of the wind drift. These men go to sea in patrol blimps, so if there's a U-boat left along our coast, it had better duck for home. The arsenal of democracy at flood tide as an avalanche of supplies pours into England and fateful invasion day nears. Trained to razor edge, the troops are inspected by General Eisenhower, accompanied by Air Marshal Tedder and General Montgomery, two of his deputy commanders. Endlessly, maneuvers and training are turning the English countryside into a stage for the greatest military dress rehearsal in history. Britain's newest tank destroyer, the Piat gun, a 35-pound killer. These paratroopers darken the skies. Their shadow lengthens over Fortress Europe, that fortress without a roof. The clock ticks on toward Hitler's doom. War is not all flags flying and victorious armies marching. On the United States Army Air Force is off for Berlin. Bucking a 70-mile-an-hour headwind, our flying forts hit temperatures ranging as low as 58 below zero as it bombs away over the German capital. One of our motors is shot out as we head for home after this big raid that cost us 14 bombers. That channel is a welcome sight. Air Force pictures show how flares are used to signal which forts have wounded crewmen aboard and to send medical ground crews into action. They'll be ready with first aid and blood plasma. The first American flag to fly over Berlin. Heroes of the 8th Air Force. They tell of their first daylight raid.
I'd like to introduce the pilot of the crew on this lead ship, Lieutenant Brown. Brownie?
Colonel, I was glad that I was along with him. I don't care about too many of them like that.
Fine. Sergeant, you were flying as waist gunner in the sock robbers.
Well, Colonel, all I got to say was my birthday that day, and it was a hell of a place to celebrate a birthday, but it was well worth it. These first ones go over Berlin.
Well, boys, how would you like to go over again?
German prisoners of war in a northern Michigan camp take to their daily chores with a will, as the Signal Corps pictures show. Use of the men for timber work was recently authorized to offset the grave labor shortage. Many of these men are expert shoemakers. Prisoners receive 80 cents a day. They may save it or spend it at the prison canteen. Meals equivalent to those of the Army are served and apparently enjoyed. There is no boredom here. This is imprisonment in humane America. Brazilian fishermen find good fishing off their coast that pays better returns than the finny variety. The catch is crude rubber, lost by the German war machine when the U.S. Navy sank 3 blockade runners. The German ships were bound from the Dutch East Indies with their vital cargoes when caught and sunk. Since then, fishermen have salvaged from 10 to 20 tons a day. Hitler's loss will help keep our war machines rolling. At an airport somewhere in the Caribbean, a huge U.S. transport brings in Eleanor Roosevelt. Signal Corps pictures show her stopping off here on one of her many trips. The Caribbean is important in America's defensive pattern, and Mrs. Roosevelt, with General Shedd, reviews the troops that are the bulwark of our far-flung defenses to the south. A new Australian destroyer is being christened today by Mrs. Douglas MacArthur. Named the Bataan in tribute to these gallant men of General MacArthur's who fought the Japs to the very end, she will bear an honored name.
Listen thee, Bataan, and may God bless you.
Bataan is the name that this proud ship goes forth to avenge. May she have the honor of sailing victoriously past Bataan itself in our sweep to victory. A task force raids the Saipan-Tinian Islands in the Marianas Group. Jap planes attack. "29 Japs shot from the sky." Altogether, including those wrecked on the ground, we accounted for 135 Jap planes. In addition, 2 enemy cargo ships were sunk and 9 others damaged. We lost only 6 planes. Not one of our ships was sunk. These are official Navy pictures. Navy didn't turn up, as usual, even though the enemy detected our approach well in advance. Navy Secretary Knox said this raid in the one on Truk proved our mastery of the Pacific. The great harp drips with rain, but it takes more than water to dampen the Irish come St. Patrick's Day in the morning. 48,000 faithful strut up New York's 5th Avenue. The wee ones were there, too. Mayor LaGuardia was invited. There may be water in those boots, but watch that strut. She can practically play Molly O with that baton. Sure, and it's a long parade with many of the fighting Irish missing. Today they're fighting on nearly every Allied front. May St. Patrick be with them. In a surprise action that stunned the defenders and the Japanese homeland, a carrier task force delivers a 2-day knockout blow at Truk. The enemy's big mystery naval base in the Carolines is no longer a mystery, nor does it remain a great naval base. Jap planes are driven from the sky. 201 enemy planes destroyed, another 50 damaged. Elaborate war installations that had been hidden from the world for years are scorched from the earth. 23 Jap ships sunk. 6 more probably a total loss, and 11 badly damaged. 40 vessels, totaling in all between 75 and 100,000 tons. Official Navy pictures of a Jap warship seeking to escape our dive bombers. A ship blasted in half. Wheel shot away and suffering other damage, one plane is miraculously landed by its wounded pilot. We lost only 17 planes and no ships in this battle. An heroic victory and a death blow to the Japs' pride.
The Battle of Burma has reached a test of strength between the Japs and the Allies. On the Arakan front in the south, the British push forward. The Tommies haven't lost their sense of humor in this grueling jungle warfare. There are no shows from home to bolster their morale, but they take care of that themselves. The advance is covered by an umbrella of planes. This British thrust is aimed at Rangoon, key point in southern Burma, held by the Japs. Jap foxholes are carefully probed, for here too, every wounded Jap is as deadly as a booby trap. This guy seems harmless enough, but they take no chances. Further north, the Japs have penetrated into India, but American glider troops have landed far behind them to cut off their supplies. After careful examination, the foe is carried to the rear with our own wounded. Not many weeks of jungle fighting remain in Burma, for soon the monsoons will set in, turning it into an impassable quagmire. What the Jap strategy will be may be found in the examination of captured equipment. It's far from the last round in the battle for Burma. The Arab, the traditional Superman of the desert warfare, has given up his thundering steed for mechanized monsters. This desert legion with light combat cars and tanks is an honor group that accepts only the best and toughest tribesmen as members. Working with the only chassis available, they armor-plated the cars themselves, turning out a job comparable with assembly lines in America. They show again that Arabia means she is prepared to take care of herself. After requests are urgent and they carry proper permits. Previously, it was an easy matter for Axis agents in neutral era to travel with impunity. Now, every traveler, even a jaunting car pilot, comes in for a close going over. Later, phone communication was ended. Across the border, Northern Ireland is a beehive of Allied activity. An important receiving point for invasion supplies, it's now safe from prying enemies. With the invasion of Europe from the west coming nearer each day, the Allies have learned a vivid lesson on the limitation of air power at Cassino. General Eaker, Mediterranean Air Force Chief, was called on to blast a path for the infantry to open the way to Rome, and the Signal Corps shows us how. In waves, bombers drop thousands of tons. With the saturation bombing completed, the way seemed open for the infantry to advance easily, but that was not the case. As General Eaker, the Air Force Chief, put it, the bombing had little effect on the general result. The enemy forces in their cellars and underground passages were not affected. Casualties were high as a confident infantry moved up. A lesson for the future is learned. A determined enemy, well dug in, can hold out against the most terrific air attack. Cassino was not a defeat, but the Germans have stopped us temporarily on the road to victory. Four Jap ships attempt futile escape as Yank dive bombers move in to give battle off Rabaul. A cruiser heads the group. A Jap interceptor is caught on the wing. Naval and air power such as this is whittling away at Jap shipping. Wing cameras show the type of action that has carried task forces deep into Japan's secondary defenses at Palau, 500 miles from the Philippines. A steady march into Tojo's front yard. Secretary Morgenthau and Charles Skouras examined the giant review of the motion picture industry's fourth war loan drive. A campaign was conducted to sell a bond for every seat in 16,000 theaters. Newsreels, seen by 570 million people, made their contribution. A grateful American industry does its bit.
As Old Man Sunshine moves northward, well-filled bathing suits move with him. The college in Chicago is the scene of this bevy of pulchritude. A preview in profile of what the well-dressed beach dunker will almost wear this summer. Three of a kind beat two pair, but not when the assortment runs like this. Any four are in the money anytime. You must admit the modern bathing suit. Oh dear, what's this? Ah, yes, those dazzling beauties of a bygone age. Papa thought they were swell.
The Jap can imitate, but he can't invent. That was proven again by the late General Wingate, shown in Burma with Lord Louis Mountbatten. The English general taught the Jap, with the help of Colonel Phil Cochrane here, Flip Corkin of the comic strip, that we're better jungle fighters than any snipers they ever lashed in a tree. General Wingate, who was killed in a plane crash, thrust deep into Burma with his raiders to harass the Japs, and all through his campaign he was supplied by air. Planes keep our men armed and fed, as they fight far back of the Jap armies that are attempting to establish a foothold in India before the monsoons begin. Our thrust in Burma has cut all enemy ground communications, and we tell him out loud. Most of the troops harassing the Japs were flown in, and prisoners have said their high command was caught asleep at the switch. Jap wounded received the same care as our own men. Along with the wounded, another problem is caring for the natives who were plundered by the Japs before we moved in. American-trained Chinese who took Mangwan, key center in Burma, camp by a Buddhist shrine before they push on. And these Signal Corps pictures give us a brief glimpse of roads we have cut through the jungles, so that Uncle Joe Stilwell, with his Chinese and American troops, can outflank the enemy. Today, China has the weapons to fight. One of our tanks is damaged by a Jap mine. Every dead Jap is a symbol of Chinese vengeance. The Jap sun is slowly sinking, and their first victims, the Chinese, are paying with their blood to make the Nips regret that day. As we advance, we establish permanent air bases that will give wing to our warplanes. And it's a happy birthday for General Stilwell on the Burma front as he cuts the first piece of cake for his son, a colonel. 61 years young, Uncle Joe has reason to celebrate the success of his campaign in Burma. Everybody congratulated him, but Joe. Salvaging airplane material at the Alameda, California Naval Air Station. The bullet-ridden plane of Commander Butch O'Hare, lost in Pacific combat. From the junk heap come many valuable airplane parts. All aluminum is broken up and melted down. 80% of the material goes back into service. Another means to victory. Where there's fighting, there's Irish. And General Alexander, himself an Irishman, observed St. Patrick's Day on the casino front with an Irish regiment and the traditional exchange of shamrocks. The Allied Commander-in-Chief in Italy is treated to some snappy marching. While at Anzio, English rocket guns go into action. A Yank task force off Saipan Island in the Marianas attacked by Jap planes by the enemy. Score 1 for the Navy. Two down, 1 to go. That makes 3 in the Pacific. On the other side of the globe, the Navy strikes again. A seaplane tender attempts to ram a German submarine in the Atlantic. Riddled from stem to stern, the U-boat sinks, keeping Allied sea lanes open. of America, industrial giant. New York Harbor teems with the cargoes of war bound for invasion. The bridge of ships ferries tirelessly to British docksides, the other end of the bridge. Invasion stockpiles mount to fantastic heights. This is why your tires must do. Just name it and they've got it. It's all there. All the homelier comforts of home, as these Signal Corps pictures show. Good reasons why we can't have metal gadgets at home. On these pontoons, bridges will be built. Plain motors to thunder victory, and gas to feed them. But the king's deer have only a mild interest in the proceedings. The arsenal of determined armies and the wheels of victory. Supremacy in the air. Demolition bombs and an avalanche of production by a free people rushing like a torrent to engulf tyrant.
One of 38 baby flat tops delivered to Britain by the United States under Lend-Lease makes ready to receive its planes somewhere off the west coast of Canada. First of the carrier's brood lands on the 500-foot deck. The compact carrier is a fully equipped floating flying field with hangars and repair shops. Used as escort vessels, these speedy air bases, both in the British and American navies, are delivering the death blow to Hitler's U-boat warfare.
European theater of operations, Allied power continues to crack down on Hitler's borders. Heavy guns force the enemy lines to break at Anzio. In England, General Eisenhower, Supreme Commander for the European theater, makes a tour of inspection. Signal Corps cameras accompany him on a trip to a fighter and bomber base of the 9th Air Force. He gets in some target practice. All services are tested in preparation for invasion. While the tightening up program goes on, American daylight bombers continually hammer at enemy installations. Transportation facilities, vital to enemy operations, are hit. Fighter planes take care of straggling Nazi. And Nazi planes that never got into the air. Yank planes wing home at day's end. But with dusk, the RAF heavies take over the job of harassing enemy operations. It's a round-the-clock assignment. Back in England, a glider is being uncrated. A mobile reclamation and repair squadron operates the assembly field. When they arrived a year ago, no housing facilities were available. So with typical ingenuity, these craftsmen built Shantytown. The idea being that as fast as a glider is unloaded, the crate becomes a snug shanty. G.I. Joe moves right in. World news on a homemade radio. Homey touches and homey tasks relieve the tension of pre-invasion days. The shanties are comfortable, but mail call brings them out every time. A barber shop made from scrap material adjusts the charges to fit the pocketbook. We said these Yanks were ingenious, and with invasion itself, we'll bet Hitler thinks so too. Captain Don Gentili and Captain John Godfrey are welcomed in Washington by their families as they return home for a rest. Captain Gentili has 30 planes to his credit, topping Godfrey by 1 Nazi. But you can be sure that Mother Godfrey is proud of her boy. Captain Godfrey worked as wingman for Gentili, a combination that couldn't be licked. A few of the many cameramen ready to cover D-Day. These Navy men will bring you pictures of this historical invasion. Of these war cameramen, we can only show you a few, but these are some of the men who will risk their lives to shoot this gigantic military venture. Here's Frank Purnell of Universal. He was wounded 9 times taking pictures under fire. Working with the newsreel men will be the Army combat photographers. There's Neil Sullivan, a newsreeler, as is Johnny Buckhurst. Bob Blair, another old-timer. Aerial combat cameraman, Lieutenant Phil Browning, and another former newsreeler, Major Sam Greenwald. They're primed for the job, along with a guy from Brooklyn, Captain Jesse Sabin, just itching to photograph the fall of Choyman bums. An airborne army striking from the skies. That's the glider and carrier troops demonstrating their training at Laurinburg-Maxton Base, North Carolina. These nylon tow ropes, honest girls, are hooked onto the tow plane, then to the gliders. Now the carriers are emptied. Split-second timing is demanded when these troops of the 1st Carrier Command hit the ground. The ticklish business of bringing in the gliders on rough terrain and in close formation. The daring of these glider men is unequaled. And here's what's known as landing on a dime. Closes down on the Italian front, and Allied guns stab at the Nazis. French troops under a Yank smokescreen, and tanks move forward, driving on the Gustav line. Castelforte, called Little Casino, is heavily shelled prior to its capture. Hordes of German prisoners are taken as the enemy stronghold surrenders. Strain and weariness mark the features of these battered captives, victims of the Allied drive on Rome. Castelforte lies in ruins. These Signal Corps and newsreel pictures show the drive that united the main Allied forces with those stubbornly holding the Anzio beachhead. and the British strike at Cassino. Here, too, many prisoners are taken. The Gustav line and the Adolf Hitler line reel under the blows of our forces. The ruined Benedictine Abbey on Monte Cassino, long a German fortress, is abandoned. At the foot of the mountain, the gutted buildings of the town offer grim testimony to the fury of the battle that raged for months. The 5th and 8th Armies continue to smash ahead, taking town after town, until they control the Appian Way, main German supply line from Rome. Bombed out Italian townsfolk, some of them withstood terrific barrages, hiding deep in the ruins. But the tide of battle rolls on as Martin marauders attack communications behind the German lines. The road to Rome is open.
This is shattered, bomb-blasted Berlin, burning and crumbling under the ceaseless Allied hammering. These captured German films show the havoc wrought by concentrated air attack. Herr Goebbels said positively it couldn't happen. Is smoke getting in your eyes, Herr Goebbels? Weary Berliners reenact scenes reminiscent of the London Blitz, victims of their faith in the Luftwaffe. 50,000 tons of bombs are the price of belief in Hitler, whose capital is dissolving with his regime.
Cassino, crushed by the Allied war machine, lies in ruins. The retreating Germans left mines and booby traps to hinder our advance. And though some of our tanks were casualties in the terrific battle, the Nazis have been driven far beyond the shattered walls of Monte Cassino. Commanding officers of British, American, and French armies, including Generals Alexander and Truscott, and the leader of the American 5th, General Mark Clark, plan the drive on Rome. Thousands of German prisoners are taken as the Allied forces reach heights within sight of the Italian capital. These are Signal Corps pictures. A German secret weapon, the Death Wagon, captured on the Italian front. This radio-controlled tank is designed to deliver 1,000 pounds of explosives. Another of Adolf's surprises, a human torpedo, was driven ashore near Anzio. Its one-man crew, a 17-year-old Kriegsmarine, a 6-month veteran, is proud and defiant. To find out what makes the suicide craft tick, another German miracle plan that didn't come off.
This is Europe. This is the wall of the Nazi fortress. All the skill of a brutally great military and engineering people have gone into the construction of this wall. Today, boys from New York and London, from Seattle and Manchester, from Toronto and Montreal, from Marseille, Warsaw and Prague, from Narvik, and from thousands of other Allied homes are doing what Hitler and Napoleon dared not do. cross the waters of the English Channel and attack the fortified coast on the other side. The target is the German army and its leaders, who are probably not smiling today. In the hills of Persia last December, today's fighting on the coast of France was planned and put on the Allied calendar. In Britain, the dispossessed soldiery of Europe prepared for the voyage home. The Dutch, the Poles, the Czechs, the Norwegians remembering the bitter spring of 1940. From the New World came the Americans, and on their own soil, the British, who prepared for a different invasion 4 years ago. All waiting for the signal from the men who had beaten the German in Africa, Sicily and Italy, and were now turning their attentions to the Germans in the West. Invasion was every freighter, luxury liner, transport we could lay our hands on. Invasion was the Navy and Coastal Command aircraft fighting their unending war with the Nazi submarine fleet over all the sea and air highways to Britain. Invasion was the Navy winning that war and making safe landfall with iron treasure from America and the British Commonwealth. The smoky docks against which the Nazis had vainly sacrificed the cream of the Luftwaffe rumbled with the weight of British and American arms and equipment. GIs and lance corporals and grizzled civilian longshoremen worked the cranes and hooks that swung the martial wealth of the free world onto the soil of Britain. Here was Montana's copper, Australia's wheat, Pennsylvania's steel, Texas cattle, the nimble fingers of the women in the aircraft factories of California, the sweat and muscle of the Canadian mines. Here was the loaded and crated determination of the United Nations to come to a decision this year in Europe. Here were the men who would come to stand side by side with their allies, facing the European coast from the Arctic tip of Norway to the Bay of Biscay. Day and night, the labor went on. At night, too, other guests prepared to visit the Führer without invitation. With Britain's young heroes flew the men of the Royal Canadian Air Force and the Royal Australian Air Force, and backing the enormous flow of highly trained flying men into the operational squadrons was the great British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, its training fields stretching across Canada from coast to coast. The RAF, Avengers of Warsaw, Rotterdam, Coventry, London, penetrated night after night through the dark weather over Europe to pound the strategic factories and concentration points of Hitler's empire. The aircraft factories, the munition works, the truck assembly plants, the power plants, Munich, Hamburg, Cologne, Nuremberg, Brunswick, Frankfurt, Hanover, Essen, Berlin. Along the bombed roads of Britain, the star, now worn not only by American but by all Allied vehicles, became as familiar as the advertisement for Bass's ale. On rubber and steel, the goods of war rolled to dispersal and distribution points throughout Great Britain, there to be stored against a day of need. Countless man-hours, tremendous feats of energy and organization went into the job of supplying the greatest invasion force in history. From Allied factories flowed the weapons of freedom. the vast potential of the American industry was being realized and added to the output of Great Britain. Night and day, the vast business of assembly went on in preparation for the coming attack. And to carry all this, locomotives, freight cars for the railway lines of the continent. Invasion was piled high in Devon and Cornwall, in London and Liverpool. Invasion stretched its long lines of tanks and guns and vehicles down the rolling English roads. To the enemy, a growing menace. To the Allies, the climax of years of endurance and endeavor. Great stores had to be protected from German air attack. Men of the Home Guard, women of the ATS and Americans stood to the guns. In the waters round Europe, a naval wall was built and maintained. Nowhere, not even in the coastal waters of Germany, could the enemy move with impunity. Mines from aircraft and patrol vessels. Warships of all the Allies relentlessly met each challenge on the sea. Minesweepers cleared the lanes for our own shipping, our own landing craft, whilst motor torpedo boats, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and aircraft slammed the waning and bedeviled sea strength of the German power. Crippled and bleeding, the German Navy clung to its harbors. Every day was D-Day for the Air Force. From dawn to dawn, the sound of aeroplane engines filled the air. England, now a green and pleasant unsinkable aircraft carrier, launched immense fleets of planes to scourge the enemy in Europe, blow down his factories, tear up his railroads, explode his ammunition dumps, fight his air force out of the sky, kill his troops wherever they were to be found. No city in German Europe was safe against the onslaughts of the Dominion and American Air Force and the RAF. Long-range fighters swept the skies all the way to Berlin for the daylight raiders and the forts and liberators. Highways to Germany were lined with flak, and the best pilots of the Luftwaffe still hurled themselves against the fire of the Fort's 50s and the Lightning's cannon. But the bombs were dropped. On the oil refineries, the aircraft factories, the ball bearing plants, on Schweinfurt, Bremen, Kiel, Wilhelmshaven, on the German production centers in France, beating Nazi war industry to its knees with a merciless arithmetic of bomb tonnage. Nazis were not to be beaten by air power alone. Men on foot, as in Caesar's time, walking into Europe yard by yard, would be needed to break the German army. The infantry of the air maneuvered through the rainy English skies, preparing for paralyzing assaults on inland strategic points in the enemy's defense. Toughened and ready, the paratroops were a threat against which no wall of concrete and steel could be erected. Drew nearer, the Air Force stepped up its attack. The target was the invasion coast and the country just beyond it. Mustangs flown by the Poles who'd fought in the Battle of Britain. Legion bombers flown by the Lorraine squadron of the Free French, revisiting their native land daily. Mitchells, flown by men of the British Commonwealth. Marauders flown by Americans who'd fought against Rommel's Air Force in Libya. Darting in low over the Channel to rock the German army back on its heels before it could set itself for the final assault. The Allied air forces, dive bombing, strafing enemy airfields, young men, wings and guns, claiming the huge profit of air superiority from the enemy establishment. In the coves and harbours of Britain, the ships that were to carry the army to Europe were collected. All the craft to land men and tanks, men and guns, men and ammunition, men and food, wire, jeeps, medicine, all the craft to institute and carry on an invasion. The time had come for the final rehearsal. The men who climb onto the beaches of the continent and fall upon the entrenched enemy are rehearsed, practiced and trained to the last detail. These men who have come from so many countries and speak so many tongues gathered together in Great Britain to form this vast Allied army, and trained alongside their British comrades from the hills and woods of Devon to the highlands of Scotland. These men have learned how to make a bed the army way, how to clean a rifle, how to read a map and fire a mortar, how to drive a tank or a mule. Some of these men had fought the German in Africa, and some of them had left their friends in graves at Alamein, Kasserine, Nereth, and outside Bizerta. And now they learn how to crack the wall of German Europe. Today, our men, the boys from New York and London, from Seattle and Manchester, Toronto and Montreal, from Marseille, Warsaw and Prague, from Narvik, fight on the beaches of Europe. The issue is now in their hands. On their gallantry and their strength, our hopes now rest.
Most powerful invasion air force ever launched. Some of the 11,000 planes that opened the path through the so-called impregnable Atlantic Wall. Between Le Havre and Cherbourg in Normandy, the Allied lightning strikes. Communications necessary to the German defenses are blasted. And now, back in England, a 50-mile-long air train gets underway. Yank paratroopers receive last-minute instructions before taking off for the invasion coast 100 miles across the English Channel. These are the heroes who established first contact with the enemy. As the transports take off, General Brereton wishes them Godspeed. Another set of brave men board gliders. Zebra stripings mark all Allied aircraft as invasion equipment. And at another English field, one of the many from which the terrific Allied power set out, British troops are glider-borne to the flaming coast of France. Backing up the mightiest invasion by air, 4,000 ships, combat and landing craft carry the war to the enemy by sea. The Coast Guard, the Navy, the Air Forces land hundreds of thousands of British, Canadians, and Yanks on Hitler's doorstep within a few days. Isolating Cherbourg with its strategic harbor is the immediate objective. Landings are made under a naval barrage. President Roosevelt said, "Let our hearts be stout." And later, Germany is the first on the list for destruction. These troops, bucking the choppy seas in the Channel, heeded his words. While landings were successful, we were not without our losses. Shock troops move in for the beach assault. The most gigantic armada in history. Each hour, and the enemy's hedgehog defenses are ahead. This is the supreme moment of invasion. This is frontal assault on an entrenched enemy. Heroic medical corpsmen remove wounded for return to England. Some landing craft are stranded on sandbars, and a tank founders. The first batch of Nazi prisoners, the supermen who believed their west wall impregnable, and a Frenchman to whom the stars and stripes spell liberty. He's waited a long time for this. What he says wouldn't pass the censor. Nazi wounded get the same care as Allied soldiers. During the landings, the merciless pounding of the entire invasion area continues. Here is real pinpoint bombing. One of the last bridges between the invasion coast and Paris gets it. When the beachhead is established, heavier equipment is moved in. Reinforcements for those heroes who are bringing liberation to the people of Europe. The cost of our initial landing was but a fraction of what our leaders expected. More than 10,000 German prisoners were captured in the first few days of the battle. And we know one Hun who's not going to peddle any more Nazi philosophy. The Allied advance is rapid as we mop up town after town. Those not seriously wounded are questioned on the spot by their captors. The Allies bagged plenty of equipment from the surprised Germans. Many of the enemy troops didn't know what hit them, and the cooperation of the French aided our cause. Some Yank will have a nice doormat when he gets back home. The Supreme Commander, General Eisenhower, holds an early conference with General Montgomery, the commander of English ground troops, and they see that all operations go according to plan. These are the men who will lead us to victory, along with General Omar Bradley with glasses, who commands our infantry. The cost of our first landing was low, but many wounded are returned to English ports, men injured in that first assault. Let these pictures remind us that there's still a long road ahead to Berlin. The bond you buy in this 5th War Loan Drive can help men like these on the path to victory. Now it's your turn. Buy that extra bond today.